Hello, and welcome to the banking track for the Fraude Week event. I'm Holmes, and I'm happy to present to you today as the global lead for enterprise fraud solutions at SAS. And although I am based in the United Kingdom, I work alongside the global team, many of whom have or will be speaking to you at this event. We look forward to seeing you more today and in the future. This session will be covering the aspects of banking fraud from a global perspective. I will keep this interactive with a range of industry metrics, case studies and benefits, as well as acknowledging the changes and impacts within the industry itself. Firstly, I'd like to talk about some market themes. These themes continually arise to the surface when I am speaking with new and current customers. They are causing concern and driving the thoughts of fraud managers and chief risk officers as they look to the future and continue to consider where they may need to review, increase, and invest in their defences. Firstly, digital channel banking has been at the forefront of many institutions. It's a great way to embrace the new generation's expectations around banking, and it serves the purpose of cutting costs. We cannot ignore the stimulus which COVID-19 has brought to the uptake of this digital initiative, and it's probably brought it forward by at least 5 years. It's one of the only aspects which banks can be thankful for with the current issues going on. Exposure to fraud will be discussed later. Also towards the top of the list, real time is becoming a key necessity. One aspect is the availability of cheaper hardware, and so ease of processing large amounts of data is a benefit without undue impacts upon total cost of ownership. In fact, it is only the bank's archaic core banking systems which are the limiting factor. However, as these are being replaced, the fraud systems can achieve the maximum benefit. From a business aspect, real-time has been used in some areas of fraud for many years, but it's expanding to new areas, and the crossover to areas such as anti-money laundering and credit risk is also a key objective driving this. For AML specifically, payment sanctions and the ability to place a hold decision on a risky transaction, independent of the reason, are key to whether processing for fraud and AML are complementary. Multifaceted analytics comes from a combination of vendor, third party, and the bank's own analytics. Being able to integrate third-party scores often adds a consortium view, which can be extremely beneficial, especially across the new digital data, which is pervasive in the industry. We will hear about some examples later. Banks are also investing in their own data scientists. In-house modelling has been a common factor of credit risk decisioning for many years, but fraud is a new avenue for banks, with the interest in developing models, especially as open source, has brought a great deal of capable programmers to the market. Next is customer centricity. It's of course a common thread in both marketing and credit risk, and will undoubtedly bring big benefits from a fraud detection perspective. Models and rules can both benefit from that holistic view. This also pushes into the last two aspects of defining an enterprise roadmap, which ultimately allows consolidation. The enterprise solution also brings efficiencies, with third-party data providers each offering their own rule authoring tools. However, this brings complexity, and the control of them is difficult to manage. However, by bringing the data and the scores to a central data and decisioning hub, this provides a great deal of control, as well as incremental benefits of combining the data. This section is specific to banking fraud, and here we have a range of aspects, and I will go through these more deeply over the next few slides. In terms of industry security, the most consistent and international form of security is the EMV or chip embedded on plastic payment cards. This world map shows the adoption of EMV and its utilisation. Although this is the most recent metrics, there have been a few iterations, and I did a review over the last few years. In 2018, Canada and Latin America had 87% of their cards and 94% of their transactions covered by EMV. This is compared to 76% and 91% back in 2016. So there has been a major increase in the number of cards which are chip capable. It also means that in 2018, Canada and Latin America combined actually overtook the other regions in the world from a card conversion perspective, second only to EMEA in terms of the volume of transactions which used EMV. This is of course bringing security to the card details and making them extremely difficult to compromise for in-person transactions. Chip, however, is only beneficial when the terminal is capable. Of course, the way the cardholder authenticates themselves can also differ. Chip and signature cards are more common in the USA, Mexico, parts of South America such as Argentina, Colombia, Peru and Venezuela, and some Asian countries such as Taiwan, Hong Kong, Thailand, South Korea, Singapore and Indonesia. On the flip side, chip and PIN cards are more common in most European countries, including the UK, Ireland, France, Finland and the Netherlands, as well as in Brazil, India, Sri Lanka, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. The chip has also brought benefits through contactless. PayWave, or PayPass as it's often known, have been a major focus during the current pandemic. And of course, NFC allows us to capitalise upon the mobile devices we carry with us each and every day. From a security perspective, then chip has brought a lot of benefits. However, it hasn't stopped everything. Lost and stolen is still a threat, where the cardholder's cards are actually stolen. ATM entrapment, for example, and shoulder surfing are two common forms of this. From a CMP perspective, Moto and Keyed are still very unsecure, and e-commerce has historically been unsecure, but with the introduction of 3D Secure 2.0, which we're currently towards the end of, it's brought less inconvenience to the customer and a lot more data for decisioning. Finally, very small volumes of non-receipt or mail intercept, as it's known, have always been there and will continue to be there. But we'll dig deeper into these risks later on. From a digital data perspective, as I have mentioned, third parties are really bringing new digital data to the fore, and the speed of innovation in this area is extreme. Not only are we actively looking at device locations from a fraud perspective, but the intricacies of the device usage are streaming as they are used. For example, the angle of the phone, the finger touches, and the speed of the finger movements are all available to be interpreted for risk of interaction, even before a payment occurs. The number of these providers continues to increase. There are global providers giving an extensive consortium viewpoint, then regional providers who can be beneficial in data restrictive environments, as well as for specific nuances key to the local data environment. The way to gauge between these different providers is difficult. However, the speed of integration is high, and that means the protection can be quickly realized. Knowing how to maximize the insights taken from these data sources is key. Luckily, many of the providers offer rules. Raw data can be brought in to this fraud system, then we can identify risks and threats with greater flexibility. We'll talk about this a little more later on as well. Here we see a range of areas around analytics. Firstly, for context, let's talk about some of them. Self-learning means the system receives initial instructions during development, but after that, it learns on its own based on the data that's fed to it, eventually resulting in a high confidence model which can be deployed to production. Machine learning algorithms are used during the model build to iteratively learn from the data. The ability to identify hidden insights without being explicitly programmed where to look are what these algorithms are going to do. They can be from proprietary as well as open source coding languages. Supervised and unsupervised modelling is often dependent upon the availability of targets. Fraud marking is in the context of this discussion, within the training of the data. To bring all of these together, we need to ingest and understand the data, learn from the data, and make additional calculations. These are called features, and then they can be leveraged by the machine learning algorithms. This is often the hardest part of the modelling exercise. Finally, we apply the relevant analytical techniques. In terms of some of the grouping, we can talk about classical machine learning. This can be as simple as linear and logistic regression, or decision trees, as well as k-means and random forest. As we increase complexity, we move into the neural network and gradient boost type algorithms. From a deep learning perspective, this can be best applied to unstructured and unlabeled data, which undoubtedly increases the complexity of this business problem. Luckily, however, within banking, we typically have a very well described data set. Finally, we have cognitive computing. These are self-learning systems that use machine learning techniques to perform specific human-like tasks in an intelligent way. For this special area, specific human-like tasks refers to a system that can classify and understand objects and recognize human languages. The intelligent part describes how the system is able to not only understand input such as text, voice or video, but also to reason and create output consumable by humans. Examples which fall under this bracket include speech to text, natural language interaction, natural language generation, image processing, and facial recognition. Overall, modelling can be a complex subject, but by breaking down the process into different areas, it can certainly add benefit to our fraud detection capabilities. Mobile and online is often classed as digital fraud. We know the current forms occurring in a payments world. They can derive from the simple concept of a mobile wallet through to the innovative new payment types and players supported by open banking initiatives like PSD2, which is a new regulation in Europe. This will undoubtedly expand as other devices become capable of making payments, and the Internet of Things will help support these innovations. I get the feeling we have yet to witness much of what is possible in this area. In this slide, we can see that the impact of the banking activities through these devices having on losses. Undoubtedly, account takeover is leading the pack with the ability to use remote channels in this far-reaching fraud risk. But many of the other areas mentioned will be discussed later in this presentation and also by my colleagues. Orchestration is very important. Its role is to enrich the data flow with additional data points, often from third-party data providers or from internal sources within the bank. This is really the first pillar to successful use of data in fraud detection. We can think here about a broad variety of data that we can leverage. Device data, session data, biometrics, geolocation, but also phone reputation data or even public records. It is, however, only providing additional context to some interaction from a customer. If we enrich the data flow on the fly with additional data, join that together, our detection capabilities will benefit immensely from that. This full stream of data then is going to be additional fuel for our analytics. But not only that, orchestration is used as a facilitator for different aspects throughout the customer journey, and then the payments lifecycle. One simple example is the ability to initiate SMS notifications when a risk is detected. For certain fraud types, then two-way SMS can save manual resource effort. One aspect to be aware of here is the risk compromise in the delivery of the service through SIM swap. As such, push notifications are seen as the ideal, but these can suffer from delivery issues, especially where data is not available. These automated communication methods should not be used when the risk of fraud includes account takeover or first-party fraud. In both of these cases, you will more than likely be interacting with the perpetrator of the fraud. So now we have covered the industry and the fraud areas, we're going to take a look at the fraud types which are continuing and growing. Here we see a range of rising frauds. Depending upon where that you are, you will undoubtedly have different risk level and impact on your losses. You will see identity theft, malware attacks, hacking, phishing and social engineering, money mules and account takeover, as well as insider threats or internal fraud. I'm sure you've all heard about these, and so we'll touch upon some of these so that hopefully you gain insights to how this is affecting the rest of the globe. Card fraud. We all know that card fraud, although there has been a high focus on this from an industry perspective, it undoubtedly still results in the largest losses. They can be seen here on the left from the 2019 UK finance fraud figures. In terms of the breakdown on the right, then you can see by the fraud types that the industry changes occurring through EMV, which we spoke about earlier, they've really resulted in a transition of losses to remote channels, and these channels are now accounting for 3/4 of the card fraud losses. It equates to a whopping 470 million GB pounds. It's interesting to note the differences between 2010 and 2019, but the 3D Secure figures will undoubtedly be reduced by the introduction of 3D Secure 2.0, which is upon us. In terms of solving the card fraud problem, SAS can bring to our clients the highest capability to prevent card fraud. Major benefits are still possible in this area, and some of our clients can attest to that in these references. These numbers will resonate with many of you who are covering the card portfolios from a fraud detection perspective, independent of where you are or whether you're from a bank or a processor. There are hyperlinks available in this slide if you would like more details. KPMG had this outlook for 2020, and the reasons were quite justifiable when they created this slide in 2019. However, COVID-19 has affected all of our lives and disrupted those priorities. Those customers who were digitally savvy were better prepared, but the current issue will have inevitably resulted in a change in their payment activity. In fact, it was more than likely that only grocery stores will have maintained some level of in-person payments. All of the other industries have been closed or moved from in-person to digital activity. Even those stores still accepting in-person payments have seen an increase in contactless payment limits, so there have undoubtedly been changes in those transaction profiles as well. For those customers who preferred visiting branches, they have, of course, been impacted. Not only were the branches closed, but the same Payments Canada study indicated that 93% of people indicated they had stopped going out completely, except for the necessities. Even call centres of banks have seen difficulties staffing themselves in order to cover the increased volume of calls. So consumers have certainly been forced to change habits, even if they had a previous preference not to engage in that digital channel. For you, Latin America, it's of course has a young and growing population, which contributes to faster growth and will undoubtedly increase the rapid adoption of digital services. As we begin to exit from the changes caused by COVID-19, the impact of it has undoubtedly resulted in continued digital activities, meaning transaction profiles will never go back to the good old days. Banks will need to understand how this impacts their fraud detection capabilities going forward, adapting their models and rules and understanding the transferring risk between channels. As well as the customer changes they cannot control, banks are being targeted with more regulatory changes. For right or wrong, banks are increasingly responsible for the actions of their clients, even when the customer is negligible or complicit. Scams bring a new perspective to fraud detection and are challenging the way that fraud is handled. What we are seeing is that fraudsters are producing many variations of scams, and COVID-19 is increasing their options and capitalizing upon the nervousness of the customer. Google has indicated they are blocking 18 million coronavirus scam emails every day. Then there are the new opportunities. Since January 2020, there have been over 4,000 COVID-19 internet domain names registered globally, of which 3% are estimated to be malicious and 5% suspicious. These figures come from Clyde & Co. In terms of financial stress, fraud is on the increase. In a recent Payments Canada survey, nearly half reported a decrease in income, and 51% said the pandemic had a negative impact on their retirement savings or other investments. In correlation with this, increased financial pressure, recent predictions from the University of Portsmouth could mean that fraud levels increase to at least 30.3% and could be as high as double in the worst case. From a payments fraud perspective, they're also seen within the area of banking fraud. Most typically in today's world, this is achieved through remote activities by the fraudster, where they offer digital devices and then a spike in malware initiated through emails, phones, and even SMS. In a recent FBI Internet Crime Report, it lists over 30 different types of scams. In this slide on the left, I extracted the top 5 by number of instances, the total losses, and then the average loss by case. You'll see that payment fraud scams is at the top of each of those different lists, whichever way you look at it. The risks here affect the different areas of banking. For example, from a corporate client perspective, business email compromise, also known as CFO or CEO fraud, represents a concerted attack which occurs across channels in order to achieve the high losses. From a consumer and retail client perspective, they are prone to the phishing type emails, whether it's phishing, smishing, etc. But primarily it involves malware initiated via digital or social engineering through the voice channels. As recently as 2017, UK Finance, the industry body which reports on all banking fraud types, introduced a new measure covering authorised push payments. This category specifically cites the genuine account holder being involved in the payment. As can be seen, both volume and value are increasing dramatically. Despite the acknowledgement that the genuine customer is involved, banks are having to invest more in the prevention of this type of fraud. At a minimum, this can be due to reputational risk. However, in the UK again, the payment system regulator introduced a voluntary code of conduct, which has now been effective for a year and makes the payment service provider liable under certain circumstances. This has undoubtedly increased the cost of doing business for a bank, meaning a capable fraud detection solution is going to be key. To continue the insights into scams with some numbers, at the right side of this slide, UK not-for-profit identified that younger and older people are typically the primary victims of scams. The table from the FBI survey showing the losses in relation to age demographics of victims also supports this. You can see that the actual losses point to the two ends of the age range as suffering the heaviest. There are very different reasons for these two groups suffering. For the younger generation, digital acceptance and being digitally active means that they are more likely to be exposed to malware, and phishing is certainly an aspect which allows them to be scammed. However, naivety also plays a key role. For the older generation, however, a key factor in their exposure of fraud scams is caused by them being overly trusting, and loneliness makes them vulnerable to social engineering. From the discussions I have with banking clients globally, I can certainly reinforce the information presented here. It shows the global impact of scams collated by the FBI is very true. From this, it is apparent that the advanced world countries are facing most of the risk. Of the 3 LATAM countries listed in the table, Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina are within the top 10. Interpol cites that on average, a successful business email compromise attack can net the fraudsters about $130,000 US. Independent of the reasons, they're certainly on the winning team. If we look now at application fraud, the metric slide provides an understanding of the size and significance of the application fraud problem. We're seeing it's around a 16 billion problem in the United States alone, certainly an amount that's worth addressing. Really, in a world where we lose face-to-face human interaction, we can no longer rely on what the customer submits in the application and on the documents they share via electronic channels. We need to obtain more information about that person and also need to rely upon technology. We need to know about the new customer as much as possible in order to be sure they are not someone else or someone that does not exist at all. From that perspective, it's very important to enrich the data with additional data points from third-party providers. And this is the first pillar to success. We can think here about a broad variety of data we can leverage, including public record information. Here are some key figures of using SAS for application fraud. And this is specifically from a bank. Some of the highlights include the fact that contact phone numbers reference immigration agents, casinos, the bank's own branch in some cases. And then there were some other more normal places such as working employers. The SAS results showed that 4 times more application fraud was found over the incumbent solution, and this was valued at $3 million per month. Also, investigation times were improved by 2.5 times, considering the beneficial investigation techniques which SAS can bring. We can also observe that identity theft is on the rise. In the US itself, the losses related to identity theft reached over $17 billion US in 2019. Criminals have had ready access to the data they need to misuse a real identity or create a synthetic one. The Identity Theft Resource Center has recorded more than 11,000 data breaches in the US. More than 1.6 billion records have been exposed since it started tracking this information in 2005. In that context, it's important for any organization that uses digital processes to grant credit or to manage funds through a quick online process that due diligence is critical. They need to detect stolen or synthetic identities without adding friction to the interaction. Identity is extremely important as it is the core of these key decisions, not only around granting new loans and new accounts, but also around authentication when a customer logs in at a later date or tries to perform a transaction. In this case study, it was presented on day 1, but it relates to the validation of identity, and I thought it was worth reiterating here amongst the banking fraud audience. At a high level, we can see it uses many of the concepts of a fraud system with data, the key use case of rules and analytics, and the ability to provide a response in real time. But the key here is that it can be a service, pulling insights from many different providers, all available through a hosted offering. It's really an easy plug and play way of stopping a major fraud problem, and the benefits you can see on the right just go to show how effective this capability can be. Internal fraud or insider threat is undoubtedly going to be a concern for banks as more people work remotely. It has always been a risk with massive consequences from a reputational perspective. However, controls around unauthorized surfing and no cell phones at desk policies were much easier to enforce through vigilance and controls when employees were in the workplace. Home working and the flexibility in working hours this provides makes identifying unusual patterns and a verified need to access personal records even harder to engage. Recording screens through secondary devices is an even greater risk. The increased financial pressures of reduced hours and salaries, as well as furloughed members of the household, reducing overall income, all place temptation to commit internal fraud at a higher level. Bringing all of these areas of fraud use cases together, I wanted to present this slide. Here we have a view of one of our enterprise clients covering many different use cases. PKO is the #1 bank in Poland with the highest number of customers of the country's banks. They have over 8 million users of their digital channel, over 20 million accounts, and 9 million cards in circulation. As a market leader, PKO is at risk of all attacks from both transaction frauds in internet, mobile, cards, and branch channels. However, to ensure that they truly covered the enterprise, they also have the internal fraud for their 1,300 banks, 1,000 agencies, and nearly 30,000 employees covered through the SAS fraud system. They are truly enterprise and have maximized this not just from an internal fraud perspective, but from a holistic customer viewpoint. As we go into how this was solved and the fraud solution which SAS offer, I just wanted to present some aspects which are seen key as requirements. There are a great deal of issues facing banks in terms of capability, and therefore the optimum design for a fraud system needs to be considered carefully. These charts show current level of general capability compared to the desired new capability. In essence, the principles of what makes a good fraud system is broad. Just picking on a few topics within the slides. Being self-sufficient from IT and being able to test what-if scenarios are key to the business. It ensures they can be independent. And of course, the increased application of machine learning and AI. On that, the obvious reason for machine learning and AI is to detect and prevent fraud at the earliest point possible, and this results in reduced fraud losses. Analytics are also utilized for fast-track people through the process, providing a more positive customer experience and fewer abandonments. These abandonments can apply to all activities, but include applications and payments. If we think about how analytics can help, we obtain best results if we apply a hybrid approach and leverage various techniques. Business rules, anomaly detection, machine learning, and also network analytics. Such combined approach is crucial for better detection of frauds that are becoming more complex. So when we look to analytics, machine learning models help us to identify risky cases, and network analytics supplements it with the ability to detect suspicious connections in communities and also organized crime rings. If we think about the additional data points that could be used, like image or voice data, we can leverage additional AI techniques to utilize this. This is going to lower false positives and increase the customer experience. On this slide, we present the full range of SAS's capability, which can be applied in an enterprise fraud setting. The analytics with rules, anomaly detection, models, and network link analysis. The decisioning in real time, near real time, or the solution also provides the investigator or the analyst with a flexible and configurable user interface, capable of presenting the needed information. Visualization is of course key, and rendering in numerous formats including graphs, charts, and network diagrams. Overall, SAS provides an end-to-end solution to address fraud. The goal is to maximize the automation of analytics, decisioning, and processes. If, in case manual intervention is required, the goal is to provide the analyst or investigator with the information needed to make an informed decision to disposition the work item. Some of the areas we should consider are orchestration, real-time scoring, customer-centric, modular solution design, advanced analytics, quick and effective rules development and deployment, an ergonomic alert interface, configurability, and automation integration. I would like to thank you for your time today. If you have any questions, please raise them to us and we will endeavour to answer them. You can either ask your colleagues or you can email us directly. I hope you have a great fraud week and thank you for listening.